Hey, and welcome to the online coaching video for small group leaders at Dayspring Baptist Church. I'm going to be leading you through this session, and this one is for on-campus small group leaders, and this is for those who are going to be leading small group sessions on September the 1st, 2013. So, if you're an on-campus small group leader leading a group that day, welcome. We're going to move right through it together. You're going to need a few things as we go through this video together. Number one, you're going to need about 15 minutes of uninterrupted time. Secondly, you're going to need your your teaching transcript, which you should have. It looks like this, dated September 1. You're going to need that in front of you. You're also going to need something to write with so you can take some notes. So if you don't have your teaching transcript or something to write with, go ahead and hit pause on this video. Go grab those things and then come back as we move through this coaching session together. Now, as you have your coaching transcript with you, I'm just going to talk you through it page by page and move you through it so that you're equipped to lead your lesson on that day. So get it in front of you and let's go ahead and jump on in. Page 1 on your on your teaching transcript, page 1 is not something that you actually teach. This is your lesson overview. This is telling you the general lesson that you're teaching that day. So look at page 1 on your lesson overview. It says this: the primary teaching point you're trying to communicate in this lesson is this: that we all play an important role in the story of Jesus. That's the primary teaching point. This is a very encouraging lesson that we're going to be leading, because here's what we're saying. When you consider your own life, the story of your life, and so when we use that word story, we're not using it in the fictitious sense, like a fictional story, but the story of your life, the story of my life. What we're communicating is this: that if the story of your life is swallowed up in the greater story of Jesus, the central figure in human history, that if my story is found within his story, then I have a significant and important life to live. And that's exactly what happens. That God includes us as supporting cast members in the great narrative of Jesus, in his life and in his history. That God has included us in that is such an encouraging thing. So that's what you're communicating in this lesson. That just like John the Baptist, we have to recognize our role as supporting characters in the greater picture of the life and ministry of Jesus. So that's what you're going to be communicating. So having said that, let's go ahead and dive right into the lesson. Look at page 2 on your teaching transcript. Page 2 is the introduction of your lesson for that morning. Now, I need to speak individually to those of you who are 9 o'clock group leaders and those of you who are 10:30 group leaders. So I'm going to kind of speak to each of you individually here. The introduction of this lesson comes with two options. If you're a 10:30 group leader, you're not going to use either option. There's actually a third option for you. If you're a 10:30 group leader, here's how you need to start your group time, not just on this Sunday, but every Sunday. You need to begin your group time by allowing people a chance to talk out what they just heard in the Sunday sermon. You're going to be coming out of the worship center. Everybody's going to be having just heard a message together. You need to start your time together by allowing people a chance to talk it out together. What were they hearing? What made an impression on their head and in their heart? What was God doing to them as they listened? Allow people a chance to talk about this. You have some tips there on the side of page 2 that help you get that ball rolling. And let me say this. I know that when you have a lesson prepared, you're ready to teach it, you come in excited to teach it. I know that when you start off by opening up this potential can of worms, saying, hey, everybody, tell me what's on your mind. Tell me what you just heard. Tell me what's going on in your heart. I know that you risk, the chance of people talking a long time or saying a lot of things. I realize that, but I want to remind you as a group leader that the end goal for your teaching is so that the scripture would move past people's heads and into their heart. Your goal is life change. And if people are pressing this out together and you hear good, healthy dialogue happening and you hear exchange going on where change is really happening in people's lives, don't see this as cutting into your teaching time, okay? They're not cutting into your teaching time. Your teaching time is intended to help them grow. If they're growing, let it happen, okay? So I know you run that risk, but it is a risk worth taking because people may be doing something that you're hoping to accomplish through your teaching anyway. So 10:30 group leaders, Your introduction is recapping and rehashing what everybody just heard in the worship center. Now, 9 o'clock group leaders, you have two options in this introduction. And which option you choose is really going to be determined by your group's response to the lead-in question. If you look on page 2, you have a lead-in question that's about Tolkien's story, The Lord of the Rings. So you come right out of the gate and you say, hey, is anybody in here fans of Tolkien's work, The Lord of the Rings? Now, depending on that response, that will determine which of these two options you use. If that question really doesn't connect with your group, if you don't have anybody in there who's a fan of the book or the movies, and you kind of ask the question and it just kind of falls flat, then use option 1, okay? Which really you give kind of a recap and then you tie it together at the end. If though you do this lead-in question and you say, hey, anybody here a big fan of Lord of the Rings? If all of a sudden hands are going up and people are like, oh yeah, that's my favorite book or that's my favorite movie, then you move on into option 2. So your transcript coaches you through all of that. You can read that. But if you're a 9 o'clock group leader, you're going to have to be prepared to do both, okay? So you're going to have to walk in prepared for option 1 or option 2 because you really don't know how people are going to respond to that. So this is the introduction of the lesson. Again, 10:30 groups, you've got your version of the introduction, which is recapping and rehashing. 9 o'clock groups, you have your version of the introductory lesson, which is found on pages 2 and 3 of your teaching transcript here. Now, after you've gotten this introduction done, then you move into actually teaching the text. So look on page 4 of your transcript where you're going to start teaching through the text. And let me talk this through with you. At the very top, you're going to have everybody open their Bibles to John chapter 1. This is the anchor point of your lesson. This is really where people are going to stay throughout the course of the lesson here. John chapter 1 is the primary text, verses 6 through 11. Now, after everybody opens to John chapter 1, you're going to set the context, and that's all right there for you in your transcript. You're talking about how this is the prologue of John's gospel, and all that's for you right there in your transcript. After you've set the context a little bit, then you move on into verses 6 through 11 and have somebody read that or you read that out loud. Now, after you read verses 6 through 11, you'll see in your teaching transcript that you're going to point out just the reality that John, who's writing this gospel, is not one and the same as John the Baptist, who verses 6 through 11 are about. John the Apostle is writing about John the Baptist. Now, here's the question that you ask after you've read those verses. And again, this is in the middle of page 4 for you. If John's intent in writing this gospel, if John's intent is to direct us to Jesus, which he says in the prologue, this is why I'm writing this gospel. I'm writing to point you to Jesus and Jesus alone. He refers to him as the one and only. If John's intent is to direct us to Jesus so that we'll believe in Jesus, and if this is all about Jesus, then why in the prologue does he start talking about this guy named John the Baptist? I mean, why does he talk about somebody else? You're going to ask that question. And let me remind you, this is a question that you're going to ask that people haven't had a chance to think about yet. You've had a chance to think about this question. I've had a chance to think about this question. You already have an answer to this question. And if you don't have an answer to this question, you've got it written right there in your transcript. But your group members, they're going to have to think about this. So ask the question. Ask it once or twice. Phrase it differently as you ask it each time. But the question you're really trying to get at is this. If John's point is to remind us about the life of Jesus, about the story of the life of Jesus, and to point us specifically there, then why is he including somebody else's story? This guy named John the Baptizer. That's the question you're asking. Now, here's where you're leading them, and here's in your transcript. This is just a reminder that in the life and ministry of Jesus, this great story of Jesus' life, there are other names and there are other faces. There are supporting cast members, so to speak, people like John the Baptist. And we're being reminded, even here in John's prologue of John's gospel, that there are other names, there are other faces who play a part in the telling of the narrative of Jesus, all right? In Jesus' life and how it played out in history. There are other significant players. Now, Matthew chapter 11 is where we're going to point everyone next. And here's why we're doing this. Let me kind of explain the bottom of page 4. In John's prologue, although he does point out John the Baptist, he really downplays him. He says John wasn't the guy. He wasn't the one everybody was supposed to notice. He was there, but he wasn't the main character. So in John's prologue, it sounds like John is being downplayed a whole lot. But what we're pointing out in Matthew 11, by looking at Jesus' own words about John the Baptist, we're being reminded, hey, this guy was important. He mattered. John the Baptist's own story was significant, quite significant. So move on to page 5 in your transcript. I'm going to sum up all of page 5 for you, kind of in one, fell swoop here. Here's where you're going in on page 5 of your transcript. Now you're moving everybody back to John 1, verses 6 through 11 again. And here's the question that you're kind of getting at. If Jesus himself said that John the Baptist's life, that the story of John the Baptist mattered, that it was significant, that it was important, what made his story significant? What made John the Baptist's life story significant? What made it count? And you're going to see, based on verses 6 through 11 of John chapter 1, two things that really made John's story significant and made it count. Number one, you see this, the fact that he was sent from God. That it was God himself who put John's life story right here in this moment. God sent him at this point and in this time, okay? That's the first thing that made his life important, is that God sent him. Here's the second thing that made John the Baptist's life important, is that God sent him at this point in time in history to fulfill a specific mission. So the fact that John the Baptist was sent by God and the fact that God had a specific mission for John the Baptist, this gave his life significance. So here's the question that we're leading to in all of this. And again, this is on your handout. What exactly was John's mission? His God-appointed mission at this point in time in history, that which made his life story matter. What was that mission? And here's the answer, again, based on verses 6 through 11. John's mission that was given to him by God was to point people to Jesus, the true light of the world. That's what made John the Baptist's life matter. That's what gave John the Baptist significance. You can think of it this way. What gave John the Baptist's life significance, what made his individual life story matter, was that his story was swallowed up in the greater story of Jesus. Jesus' life and ministry. And again, when I say story, I'm not talking story in fiction. I'm talking about Jesus' life story. John's life story is found in the context of the great story that really matters. The light of the world who came, the one in whom people find life. John's story was counted in that story. And here's where the lesson really starts hitting home. And this is where you start landing the plane. The very same thing that gave John the Baptist significance, the very same thing that made his life matter, is where we find ourselves. God has included my life story in the greater context of the story of Jesus. God has included all of us who believe in the greater story of the life and ministry of Jesus. That gives us significance. That makes our life matter. And again, this is such an encouraging thing. You'll see on page 6, as you land the plane of your actual teaching time, that you're going to direct people to John chapter 3. You have a lead-in question before that, and there's a great teaching tip by that lead-in question, so pay attention to that. But you're going to kind of land the plane by coming into John chapter 3 and reading some things about John the Baptist's perspective. When John the Baptist realizes, hey, my whole story is just, I'm a supporting character in a greater story. You're going to see how John the Baptist responded to that and what he thought about that. Now, after you get through with page 6, you're kind of done with your primary teaching time. After that, you see on page 7, go ahead and turn to page 7 on your teaching transcript. Now you're moving into this application moment. And we could even call this a group moment, because here's what you're going to do here. At this point, you're not so much going to teach, but people are going to start teaching each other. They may not know that's what they're doing, but they're going to start teaching each other. At this point in your group time, you're going to break your group into smaller clusters if you have a larger group. But people in groups of 3 or 4 or 5, no more than 5, kind of clustered together. So if you have 15 people in your group, 3 clusters of 5, go ahead and divide them up this way. And let me say this. I know that for some of you, this may not be a dynamic that you are accustomed to. It may not be a dynamic that you've done before in your small group experience. Maybe your typical way is for people to show up and you teach or talk for like 45 minutes and they all listen. This is a change in that dynamic. Don't skip it, okay? Don't skip it, because this has been intentionally designed for people to start working it out verbally. And they have to work it out verbally. Working it out verbally, we've learned this before. This is communal repetition. This is it going past. This is the truth that you've just talked about, going past the head and into the heart. So if you skip this application moment, I'm just telling you, as a group leader, you're doing a disservice to the people you're trying to lead. So do this. Try it. Even if it's kind of new to the group and they have to kind of figure it out, go ahead and do this. Now, let me talk you through it. Look at page 7. Here's the first thing you're going to do. You're going to divide people into groups of 4 or 5, kind of let them bunch up, and you're going to distribute to them your group handouts. The group handouts are going to be provided in your class folder for that Sunday morning, so these will be provided for you. Have everybody cluster up in groups of 4 or 5. Hand out the handouts. Everybody will get one. Now at this point, you guide them through the handout, and I want you to look at page 9 on your teaching transcript. Go ahead and flip to the back of page 9. Here's your actual handout that you're handing them that day, okay? When you distribute the handout, here's what you need to do. Tell everybody, say, okay, we're going to take 10 minutes to do this together. Go ahead and define the time. We're going to take 10 minutes to do this together, and let me walk you through it. There are 3 points on this handout. As you're looking at it right now, you'll see there are 3 points. Points 2 and 3, they do together verbally. Point 1 is sort of reflective. You do it as an individual. So here's how you need to facilitate this application moment. Put them into clusters of 4 or 5. Distribute the handouts. Say to them, all right, we're going to take 10 minutes now and work through this handout in your groups. Then say this. Say, take a second and work through question number 1 all by yourself. Just say, work through it all by yourself. It utilizes the verse that you just came out of, so everybody's Bible should already be open to John chapter 3, verses 25 through 30. Have them work through number 1 by themselves. But you be the one to end that time, okay? So after about 2 or 3 minutes, as they've kind of looked through that and worked through that together, you be the one to say, okay, now everybody start talking through points 2 and 3 together, all right? So you kind of be the one that moves that whole thing along. Points 2 and 3 should be self-explanatory to your group members. They should be able to read this together and work it out together. They have some blanks that they're filling out in question number 2 based on all those verses that they're going to read. Then at point number 3, they're bringing it all together. They're tying a bow on it, and they're saying, okay, to properly understand and live out my role as a supporting cast member who points to the main character of Jesus, here's what I'm going to have to start doing in my life. So everybody's going to fill in that final blank, all right? So that's the application moment. Give every cluster about 10 minutes to do that. But you be the one to finish that 10-minute time block, okay? And you're going to have to be proactive on this. You're going to have to start saying, all right, everybody, we've got 2 minutes before we need to wrap this thing up. Or, all right, 1 more minute, then we're going to we're going to come back together. So kind of coach everybody through that application moment, all right? Now, move back to page 7 on your teaching transcript to the actual application moment. Look at it. You're going to divide your group into clusters of 4 or 5. You're going to set that time limit for them to kind of work through it. After everybody has worked through this together, and you should, this should be just a good dynamic as they're working through it. You should hear people talking, and you're kind of listening in, you're hearing answers. You may join a cluster, or you may kind of sit back and watch it. But after this time is over, if time permits, and you see this on your teaching transcript here, if time permits, you may ask a person or two to share that final blank that they filled out on their handout. Allow some people to hear from each other if time permits, okay? If you can make room for this, it'll be fantastic. I think it'll be great. If you don't have time for that, just go ahead and move on to the closing of your lesson. But after this application moment is over, you're going to conclude the lesson, which you find on page 8 of your teaching transcript. So look at page 8. Here's the conclusion. Let me say this about the conclusion. The top paragraph that you see there on the top of page 8, If you're a 10:30 group, you may just want to skip that, okay? Because that paragraph ties in with that opening illustration in the introduction that you didn't use. So you may just want to skip that top paragraph if you're a 10:30 group leader. If you're a 9 o'clock group leader, go ahead and just use the conclusion as it's written there. You can almost read it. It's just laid out for you. But let me kind of read it to you as we bring this thing to a close. Here it is. Our story isn't about us. It's about the one and only, Jesus. And isn't it humbling to know that we're actually included in this divine drama? That God has not called us to be mere nameless and faceless extras in this great story, but rather God has given us supporting roles and key parts to play, parts in history's remarkable story. We have to just realize that at the end of the day, the story isn't about us. It's about the one in whom people can believe and find life. So this is our lesson that day. God, the central piece of human history, Jesus himself, has included us as supporting roles in that great historical message. Hopefully your group will be encouraged by this. Hey, thanks for listening in on this coaching session. God bless you as you lead your group time. I'm going to be praying for you. I pray that all goes well.
Hallelujah, glorious redemption.